be taken tomorrow to evict them. The Forestry Commission men were given a police escort, but most of the hippies ignored the notices. They still say they've no fuel for their vehicles and nowhere else to go. A woman will decide tonight if the Skimped Hill estate should be turned into a huge shopping centre.
With the problem, and Mrs Thatcher has again told MPs that new laws will be introduced. She said she was delighted to do anything to make life difficult for hippie convoys. In the New Forest in Hampshire, the convoy which has prompted all the activity is still camped near Stoney Cross, while the High Court considers whether to grant the Forestry Commission a court order to move them on again.
Even on the day he might be evicted, a man still needs to eat. There's a court case coming up in London, breakfast in the camp, and on a nearby farm is disaster. 2 sheep dead and several injured, apparently by dogs from the camp.
Fanning them from flesh wounds and throat.
It's a disaster for farmers. They don't want to antagonise local people.
Sometimes it's hard to look after a dog when the paranoia and the suspicion's in the air and you're more concentrating on what's going to happen to you and what's going to happen to your home and are you going to be arrested in the next 5 minutes.
But Thursday's a busy day in the hippie camp. One bus was fueled up and ready to go, and there were more than enough hippies to fill it. This is the dole run, taking them and their forms to the DHSS office for this week's money.
Well, yeah, it's the 6th, I think.
As many of the campers can get on board are going to town, all of them with their claim forms carefully filled out. But this sort of invasion's just too much for the office, even with the 6 extra staff they've had to take on. So the hippies just have to wait their turn, though some of them have other ideas. This is the money they said they needed to be able to move on, but it just won't be enough.
Our average intake from this place doesn't account for us travelling. Not at the rate that the police like to evict us and shift us on.
How much money have you got this morning?
£31.
Back at the camp, they've had 3 days since the police told them to go. They're still waiting to know if the court will allow them
up to £47.85 a week by one of the government ministers in the Department of Health.
Satisfactory.
Well, if you're not happy about it...
Well, it's precisely for that reason, if I may say so, we've taken a number of measures in recent days to prevent it, and I think that they're beginning to work quite satisfactorily.
Well, if you're not happy about it, why were they receiving those benefits to
work? Then they're certainly not entitled to benefit. But it's precisely because we're concerned about the sort of flaws that perhaps you outline that we've set up 500 extra fraud staff within the system to deal with some of the difficulties that arise. We hope with those extra fraud staff and the changed procedures that we'll be able to deal with the matter much more satisfactorily.
Yes, now to see again, at the Tottenham Social Security Office today, personal details weren't even computerised. It was a sort of basic card index system. Surely it's impossible to check anything through that.
Well, we do have a regional index for the hippies, and of course, because of the particular difficulties with nomadic groups, and I think one needs to put them in proper context, but because of the particular difficulties with nomadic groups, we've set up a special regional index to deal with them, and also to avoid double claiming and fraud of that sort, we have a special group of officers who will be following the hippies around in order to identify them and make sure that they only claim in one place. We're very keen to make sure that that happens.
Mr. Major, the hippies say that they get £29.50 each Social Security, and it's not enough.
Well, I think if they're not genuinely seeking work, it's £29.50 too much, and I think that's the view of the public at large.
Finally, can I ask you this? Mrs. Thatcher was saying in the Commons this afternoon she'd be only too happy to make life difficult for the peace convoys. Now, as Social Security Minister, are you going to have a hand in that, making life difficult for them?
Well, I think it's a question of making life difficult for people who are genuinely seeking benefits from the system, but not seeking to put anything into it, or genuinely seeking work. Those were the people Mrs. Thatcher had in mind, and clearly the Health and Social Security system will be concerned with that.
John Major, thank you very much indeed for joining us.
Thank you.
Well, meanwhile, back at the camp itself today, there's been a visit by the Country Landowners Association, seeing for themselves how the hippies live and threatening to lobby support against the government in the House of Lords. They specifically want the government to make mass trespass a criminal offence. The day started, though, with the gruesome discovery of sheep savaged to death at the farm nearest to the hippie encampment. Charles Wace now reports.
Farmers Jane and John Twentyman live just 150 yards from the hippie convoy. The 2 dogs, an Alsatian and a Whippet, went for the necks of a flock of sheep, killing 2 and maiming others. One of the dogs became trapped in the farm's fence as it tried to escape. 6 of the sheep are said to be very poorly. The Twentyman say they had already barricaded their land against the hippies and are convinced the dogs belong to the so-called peace convoy.
It was a horrific sight, especially after a springtime of work, as far as we are concerned in rearing lambs.
The hippies have been saying for the last few days that they're peace-loving people and they don't wish any harm to anyone who happens to live nearby. What do you say to that?
Their views I cannot agree with. Their presence is one of intimidation.
Sometimes it's hard to look after a dog when the paranoia and the suspicion's in the air and you're more concentrating on what's going to happen to you and what's going to happen to your home and are you going to be arrested in the next 5 minutes.
The land at Stoney Cross has been deeply scarred by the hippie invasion. This afternoon, the country landowner's legal advisor, Jonathan Cheel, went to see the damage at first hand. Tomorrow, he's meeting Home Office officials. He'll press for the law to be strengthened against mass trespassers who he believes threaten the livelihood of many landowners in the south.
Years and years of savings, acres and acres of crops, his entire means of making his livelihood can go down the drain in a few hours of trampling by feet or by tyres. It's astonishing the amount of damage that can be done to timber, to fences, all this sort of thing, if these people stay on land. And the law doesn't allow a farmer to eject them otherwise than peacefully. And if they won't go, he has to go to the civil courts to get rid of them.
So what's the key message you're going to be delivering to government tomorrow?
Act firmly and toughly as soon as possible. Don't lose the opportunity. And remember that the vast majority of people in this country are law-abiding and are very, very worried about what is happening to people's private property.
Undoubtedly, most people living around Stoney Cross want the convoy to go, but their parish priest refuses to see them starved out. Today, he was delivering supplies to the hippies, clothes and blankets for children who haven't chosen to be living out in the open. He knows he's attracting the anger of some parishioners, but fears that unless someone makes a move of friendship towards the travellers, there could still be a repeat of last year's violence.
Wherever you have a situation when people feel that they've nowhere else to go, it makes them desperate, anxious, afraid. And where you have fear, you tend to have violence. So that fear somehow has to be cast out on both sides. This whole thing's much too heavy. It really is time that a bit more goodwill and humour was injected into this situation, and people began to relax a little bit more and have a bit of dialogue between the local police and the people on the site, so they relate as human beings.
The people of the hippie convoy now face an uncertain future. Tonight there seems little room for compromise between the hippies, still demanding a legal site for their festival, and the property owners who don't want them on their land.
Let's catch up with other news. Anything to go by. We asked you to write in with your views on the subject, but we hardly expected quite such a flood of letters. Here's a selection of the letters now with Debbie and a special edition of Postscript.
It resembles a band of medieval brigands who have no respect for the law or for the rights of others.
The views of the Home Secretary, Mr. Douglas Hurd, in the Commons on Tuesday, in a week in which the hippies found few friends in high places. But they have found considerable support from many of our viewers, including, for instance, Janet Wigney of Basingstoke.
I fully support the hippies exercising their right as British citizens to celebrate summer at Stonehenge.
Janet argues that the festival should have been permitted on a specific site and the landowner compensated.
This is a free country, so why force a minority group to break the law by making this festival illegal? There's more trouble every year since it was made so.
But freedom, says Mr. Gorton of Patcham in Sussex, isn't quite so simple.
If they really want to be free, they should not accept social security. They have no right to benefits from a society to which they contribute nothing.
And Mr. Gorton detects a sinister hand behind the phenomenon of the convoy.
They asked whether they should go. Where did they come from? They must have lived somewhere before they joined into a group. There is no doubt a good deal of organisation behind the facade of casualness and innocence.
A similar point of view comes from Mr. Andrew McCluskey of Reading.
While all of us will no doubt defend the right to freedom of movement and association, one questions whether this should be at the taxpayer's expense.
But Mrs. Shepherd of West Wittering takes a different view.
It is easy for those lucky enough to have jobs and big salaries to criticise those who are out of work, living on social security,
and who, being unable to afford a holiday, seek the next best thing, to camp out in the countryside.
But it's the general lifestyle of the travellers which arouses some of the strongest feelings. This is how the Chief Constable of Hampshire, Mr. John Duke, summed up his impressions after a visit to the camp at Stoney Cross.
Frankly, they're foul-mouthed, they smell foul, and they're soiling a treasured part of this community for residents and for holiday makers, and frankly, it's got to stop.
And Mr. Chappell of Wimborne has his own solution.
I would suggest, with all seriousness, they're dumped in a compound, fenced in until they're willing to conform. No other country would tolerate this state of affairs. We are too soft.
No doubt in his mind about what should happen to the hippies. But many of our viewers were outraged by the Chief Constable's remarks. One of them, Mr. P.R. Sherwood of Southampton.
I was shocked that the statement was made that hippies were dirty, etc. That should be of no concern for the law, the Chief Constable. What should concern the police is when these people break the law, and only that.
And the Allen family, Carol, Daniel and Jessica, write from Portsmouth.
As a family, we find his remarks offensive. We do not judge what is the correct or normal way of life, and we certainly do not accept the right of Mr. John Duke to make moral judgments on our behalf in this hidebound, patronising way.
Mr. Will Horbury of Fordingbridge goes even further.
His strident, barely concealed loathing of these people does little to improve the image of today's police as skilled, diplomatic and understanding upholders of the law. His attitude is not totally different from Germany's pre-war persecution of the Gypsies and Jews.
Well, be that as it may, several of you want to know why the police don't take a strong line on the question of untaxed and unroadworthy vehicles. The Chief Constable again.
We can take them to our courts. We'll do so very quickly on the arrest or summons procedure. But if they go into court and you can't prove ownership or keeper, then you have no case to take to the court.
Mr. Peter Donegan of Lancing was frankly amazed.
It became beyond my comprehension to understand his admitting that to enforce a court action against these people for using vehicles untaxed, uninsured, and quite obviously without an MOT certificate cannot succeed.
And Mr. D.P. Harfield writes from North Baddesley in Hampshire.
I would like to suggest the way to deal with these type of people is to confiscate their transport if they cannot produce the required documents and assist them to the nearest scrapyard.
And so the argument rages on. We've had letters on hygiene, the rights of property, damage to farmland, the disappearance of common land, the right to travel freely, police tactics and complaints about all manner of antisocial behaviour. But we'll end with 3 comments from the Allen family again, from Mr. Bill Baggs of Hook and from Mr. A.F. Jervis of Bournemouth. First, Mr. Baggs.
I saw on your report this evening a man who said, "I have 3 children, no money and no fuel for the van." I asked, would any normal parent let a situation of her own doing happen like this? What did this man...
We do not observe the convoy to be pillars of society, but it is a poor, sterile society which cannot accommodate an element of non-conformity.
When I was a child, we had free access to Stonehenge, and we marvelled at the stones and climbed on them. It may be that in 100 or 500 or 1,000 years, everyone will have lost interest in Stonehenge, and it will be demolished to build a rocket launch pad or an airport or houses. So let's enjoy it now.
Battle of Stoney Cross.